On September 14, 1990, the Yak-42 airliner was flying on the Volgograd-Sverdlovsk route with Aeroflot. There were 124 passengers and 5 crew members on board. The plane took off from Gumrak Airport, and after gaining altitude, it reached an altitude of 9,150 meters. The aircraft commander controlled the entire route. 140 kilometers from Koltsovo Airport, the crew began to lower the altitude, while disabling the longitudinal channels of the autopilot, and flying the autopilot stick along the lateral channel, in Sverdlovsk itself. It was night and raining at that time. The sky was completely covered by stratocumulus clouds, and visibility was 4 kilometers, 65 kilometers from the runway. The pilots contacted the approach controller, who gave them permission to descend to 1,800 meters to the fourth turn. The airliner was supposed to descend at a vertical speed of 20 ms, 65 kilometers from the runway. The commander decided to turn left, thereby extending the descent maneuver. The dispatcher did not correct these changes in the aircraft trajectory. After the Yak-42 turned left, it was already 8 kilometers to the right of the landing line, and the altitude was 3,700 meters, instead of the estimated 1,800. Then the aircraft's course consistently changed from 58 degrees to 20, thereby reducing the deviation. When an altitude of 3,000 meters was reached, the crew lied to the dispatcher, saying that they had reached an altitude of 1,800. Presumably, the pilots lied to the dispatcher due to their firm intention to land on the first approach. The airliner was significantly higher than the established descent trajectory, and 35 kilometers from the runway crossed the extension of its axis. Deviating, now to the left, continuing to descend and already at an altitude of 2,500 meters, the crew contacted the controller and again lying, reporting to him the altitude of 1,800, after which they received permission to make a right turn to a course of 120 and descend to 600 meters. 25 kilometers from the runway and 8 kilometers to the left of the landing course, the Yak-42, continuing to descend, began to make a right turn, when the circle controller unexpectedly contacted the pilot, and gave permission to descend to 500 meters and switch to communication with the landing controller. At the established line, the crew did not release the flaps by 20 and the chassis. As a result, 12 kilometers from the runway, the indicated airspeed of the airliner was 490 kilometers each instead of the established 360, and the airliner itself was outside the landing pattern, 1,220 meters to the left of the landing line. To enter the line, the dispatcher gave the instruction to set the course to 100, which the crew confirmed and began to perform a right turn. After which they passed the glide path entry point at an altitude of 540 meters instead of 500 and with a course deviation of 260 meters. The landing gear was released at an altitude of 450 meters at a speed of 390, when the dispatcher gave the command to take the course to 100 degrees again. After 8 seconds, the crew carried out this command from the dispatcher, setting the course to 105 degrees. As a result, 10 kilometers from the strip, they were already 654 meters to the left of the line. Then the dispatcher gave the command to maintain heading 100 and distance 85 to the left of landing 600 on the glide path, due to which after 2 kilometers the lateral deviation was reduced to 452 meters at a distance of 7 kilometers from the runway, and 200 meters to the left of the glide path. The pilots released the flaps by 20 degrees, while descending from the vertical at 8 meters per second, and the engines were operating in the flight idle mode. The airliner crossed the landing glide path in altitude, and was now below it. At the same time, due to turbulence, the crew periodically deflected the elevator excessively, sometimes up, sometimes down. At 6 kilometers from the end of the strip, the pilots began to perform a turn to eliminate the lateral deviation from the landing axis. The food released the flaps to 45. At this time the situation began to become significantly more complicated, since the automatic shutdown of the lateral channel of the automatic control system occurred and the alarms were triggered. The bank is large. Failure of the roll channel of the automatic control system and the speed is high. But not having had time to properly rest after the previous night flight of the commander, a lot of information fell on him. as he was simultaneously trying to find out the signs of the shutdown of the automatic control system and make an appropriate decision. Detected 3 signals, controlled the aircraft to maintain the course and glide path. Due to the information overload, the commander did not notice that the airliner deviated to the left by 250 meters and ended up below the glide path by 40 meters. The balance of the aircraft was disrupted when the controller gave the instruction to take a course of 90. The commander with the autopilot handle put the airliner into a bank of 22 degrees to the left. 5 kilometers from the end of the strip, the controller transmitted removal 5.5 course 88 intersecting landing to the right 50, below the glide path 10 decrease. Even before the DPRM had flown by, the Yak-42 had crossed the landing straight and was 5 kilometers from the runway to the right of the 50m axis. In connection with this, at an indicated airspeed of 330, the pilots began to turn left. When the alarm went off again, the bank was high, and then the dispatcher transmitted course 90. Then the alarms went off again, the bank channel of the south failed and the speed was high, so the commander abruptly took the control column and turned off the SAO using the button on the control column. The traverse to the DPRM was past 200 meters to the left of the glide path and above it, so the controller gave the instruction, 351 distant, crossed the landing, to the left of the landing 70 course 92. The aircraft was unbalanced, due to which it acquired additional vertical speed, and after passing the DPRM, oscillations with overloads of 1.3 G occurred, and the airliner was out of landing position below the glide path. The Yak-42 was 270 meters to the left of the glide path. When the alarms of dangerous proximity to the ground, quick decision-making, were triggered in the cockpit. In such conditions, it was necessary to immediately go around, but the crew continued the approach, although the aircraft had a significant bank and lateral deviation, and also approaching the ground at a significant speed. At 3,250 meters from the end of the runway, the pilots reported to the controller that they were ready to land. The airliner was 60 meters above the ground when the signals of dangerous proximity to the ground and the decision altitude were triggered for the second time. Then the flight mechanic told the commander, "Commander, we're leaving." The aircraft commander pulled the control column all the way back and switched the engines to takeoff mode, but due to the high rate of descent and low altitude, a disaster was already inevitable. At 1:53 a.m. on September 14th, 2 kilometers from the end of the runway, the Yak-42 crashed into the treetops at an altitude of 20 meters. Having lost speed, the airliner flew over 300 m and, 2 kilometers short of the runway, crashed into the ground and broke into 2 parts. Of the 129 people on board, 4 died, the flight mechanic, and 3 passengers. Another 40 people were seriously injured. The cause of this disaster was a crew error, which was caused by the commander's fatigue. What do you think about this disaster? Write your opinion in the comments.